Being 7 o'clock, I'll call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order. Please, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing following the pledge. We will have a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We will have the reading of the notice, please.
The adjourned annual meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Thursday, November 9th, and the agenda was duly signed and posted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I would like to request everyone please silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices or put them on vibrate as to not be an interruption to the meeting, and I appreciate and thank you for your compliance. And we'll move on to roll call. I would ask that everyone please sign in onto roll call. All right, we will move on to item number 6. I would like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening in the viewing audience, along with all of those viewing on the live feed. So thank you for your interest in county government, and thank you for, in some cases, the department heads and their interests. So we will move on to item B, education presentation and or report, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any reports by standing committee chairpersons or designees? Okay, we will move on then to item C, consent agenda, item C8 through item C12, C1. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Covelli, second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any discussion on the consent agenda items, items C8 through item C12, C1? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote. Supervisor Boots, how do you vote if you want to vote verbally?
Yes.
That was aye.
Aye.
Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to item D, Transportation Coordinating Committee, Health and Human Services Committee. Item D13, approval of the 2024 85.21 Elderly and Disabled Transportation Grant Application, Resolution 60-23. Motion by Covelli and seconded by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any discussion on item D13, the approval of the 85.21 Elderly and Disabled Transportation Grant Application? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you.
If anyone has their cell phone right next to their device or their iPad, that's probably what's causing that. Thank you. anyone in the room connected to WebEx? 'Cause if you're in the room, you can't be connected to the WebEx.
And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. We will move on to Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. Without objection, I would like to take item E15 out of order along with F16 out of order prior to the budget. Is there any objection to taking those two items out of order? Okay, we will then move to item E15, establish salaries for the county board supervisors for the 24-25 season, term, resolution 64-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Dickinson, seconded by Vice Chair McEwen. Supervisor Robinson, please.
Mr. Chair, I would, well, in executive, we indicated that this would be funded out of the reduction in the mileage for the county board. That is not reflected in the motion. Therefore, I would move to amend the motion to have the funding come out of mileage for the county board members to make it a neutral fiscal note.
Okay, is there a second? Just a second, I need to have the clerk has to key that in, please. Okay, and Supervisor Robinson with the motion and Vice Chair McEwen with the second on the amendment. So the amendment is just the balancing entry within the county board budget itself. Any discussion on the amendment? Any discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. Supervisor Longenhanen,
Yeah, it's thinking.
it's thinking. Thank you. Got it. All right, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried but is not unanimous. Moving on, now back to the motion as amended. Any discussion? Any discussion? All right, seeing no discussion, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried but not unanimous. We'll move on to now from Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee and Public Safety Committee, a resolution F16, a resolution amending the 2023 capital improvement budget for Marathon County Jail Kitchen Project 23SH-03C in the amount of up to $604,000, Phase 2, transfer from American Rescue Plan, Resolution 65-23. Motion by Supervisor Shafinsky and second by Supervisor Mask. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Now, moving back to item E14, the 2024 Budget and Property Tax Levy Resolution. I will have the Corp Counsel please explain the process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so everyone is on the same page procedurally, the first thing that needs to happen with the budget is someone needs to move it to the floor, so a motion and a second, just like we normally do on any resolution. Once the budget is on the floor, it can be amended. There are 6 amendments that are in your packet. Those can be offered procedurally at any point by anyone. I think the clerk would very much appreciate if they were taken in order because that's how she has them entered in her system. But procedurally, you can take them in whatever order your motion is made. When an amendment is on the floor, that amendment can be amended, but only once, because remember, we're talking about the main motion being the budget. That can be amended by one of these amendments or a different amendment, and the amendment can be also amended once. So if we get far afield, I'll remind everyone of that, but just a reminder. Amendments are a majority vote, and the budget is a majority vote as well. So that's all I had.
Thank you. Now, proceeding to item E14. Second, I'm still good. Yep. I'll accept the motion. Supervisor Robinson with the motion. Supervisor Shafinsky with the second. Any discussion? Any discussion? This would be the time if you wanted to offer any of the amendments, that the amendments would be available for offering. Supervisor Robinson, please.
I'm trying to get caught up. Is the First Amendment
Sheriff's Training Center.
the sheriff? I would move adoption of the funding for the Training Resource Center and amendment to the capital improvement project.
Is there a second to that amendment? Supervisor Mask with the second. Any discussion on the amendment? Again, this amendment is reflecting now more accurate numbers to the true cost of the project. Any discussion? Supervisor Shafinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I guess my question is I'd like to understand the reason for the change in the numbers and why we would consent to a significant increase. Usually when you go out for bid on a project and if you accept a bid, you're compelled to stay there. So I'm wondering why we would want to change that.
I'll ask the Deputy Administrator to provide the background, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to answer the question, this was one of 2 projects that, well, first I should say, in a normal process, you might go out to design one year and then get the construction done the second year. But knowing that ARPA funds had an expiration date for next year, this was one that we identified early on after talking with the sheriff and chief deputy. And there were some comments earlier in the year about whether and how we might approach that space differently. So we looked out at that space and worked to fast track the design and found we used in-house funds to get the design funded so that we could present a project to you for construction this year so that we could bid it out early in the year, which is what you want to do for any project like this. So it's not something that's been bid out yet. The initial number was the rough estimate we put together as part of that design process, and then the new number is after the design process was complete, you had a construction estimate that was informed by that process. And so it is an increase over what we estimated initially without having gone through that process, but this is the final number based on what the architects put together. The bid could come in less, or but at the same time, this is the amount that is based on the specs that has been put together in the design.
And the other note would be that this project originally there was a proposed project for a total new facility, which was at almost twice the cost of this. And then they found that that they could remodel this project, the current facility, and bring in and get to the needs that the Sheriff's Department has at a much reduced cost. And that's what this still reflects.
Follow-up, please.
Go ahead.
So the next question would be then, was the architect or the design team given any direction to say, okay, you've come back, you've significantly had a significant cost difference between what we thought it would be? Was any thought given and any direction given to, okay, go back design team, go back to the original budget and tell us what it would take to hold to that budget?
That didn't happen, but maybe I should be more clear. The initial budget estimate was put together without being informed by the actual design process to get to specs for a construction estimate. And so that was looking at the two facilities, we're looking at renovating and updating the pieces that we knew were in play and saying, look, based on this initial assessment, this is likely what that cost is going to be. So then once we put the design.
I understood.
No, I understand, but once the RFP, we didn't have we were building a budget prior to the design process. So the design process actually informed the estimate that we had put together at a high level, and that's what got the actual number, not the one that we had put together as a rough estimate. And this is just a symptom of the fact that we're doing design. We funded the design within the year, and then in order to have it available for ARPA funding, or just any funding really, so you could bid it out next year.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
I would move to approve the capital expenditure for the Dells of Eau Claire dump station.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Ritter. Supervisor Robinson.
And on the motion, this was part of the initial capital improvement list that you received from administration early on, and then when it came into the administrator's budget, it was not included. And we had asked for additional clarification on return on investment from the Parks Director, and she provided it, and we didn't take it up before the publication of the budget, and then realized that we didn't. And there were a number of projects, and we are advancing two of those today. This is one of them. This deals with the dump station, which we're required to have an upgrade by Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection requirements. There's a quick payback on this, but we will lose about $6,000 annually if we potentially don't have that dump station. Don't do it, we would need to reduce the number of campsites, or change the campsites from electric to tent only, and resulting in a loss of revenue. So we felt as if it was important to include in next year's KIP. Again, using ARPA dollars.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
I would move to introduce the amendment dealing with the funding of the improvements at Eastgate Hall,
Is there a
And-
second?
funded out of ARPA.
Seconded by Supervisor Mask. Supervisor Robinson, please.
This is one of the other project that was proposed by the Parks Department. The original budget that was advanced early included the entire project. It was scaled back to just do the flooring, and the decision was it didn't make sense to do a portion of the remodeling there, but rather do all the remodeling, ceiling, windows, and siding all at the same time. And again, it's funded out of ARPA. There is a payback. We anticipate potentially additional revenues due to the improved acoustics associated with this project.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. And we will, any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson.
I would move to amend the KIP to include the County Highway N bridge replacement.
Is there a second? Okay, motion's made and seconded by motion by Robinson, seconded by Supervisor Hardinger. Supervisor Robinson, please.
This was an issue that was recently brought to the attention of the Infrastructure Committee and the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. It deals with a bridge that went from a 58 to a 35 rating, and 100 is top and 0 is low. If it gets below 50, you need to take a look at it, but there's been a significant deterioration of the bridge based upon the most recent inspection. The committee looked at whether it would go through the normal route, which would potentially result in the work being done in 2026 or 27. The feeling was that there was a significant hazard and that we needed to accelerate it, and we're not going through the state process, and the total project cost is almost, just a little bit over half of the project cost, but it's 100% funded by the county, and we're recommending that this be funded out of the highway reserves. Again, the concern is the safety of the bridge, and we want to try to avoid that bridge being posted. It's a critical bridge for many businesses in that area.
Director of Finance, Christie, please.
On the resolution, it looks like they have the old number of 500,000, but then there's the actual project cost of 435,400. So I just want to confirm that the resolution amendment is for the 435,400 in total.
That was the intent.
Jim gave me a thumbs up, so,
The one
okay.
over there is correct. It's
Okay,
printed out
great,
correct.
thank you.
So the actual cost of the estimated on the bridge construction is 435, not the 500. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and is unanimous. Any other discussion? Any other discussion?
I move to the floor amendment number 5 for approving the consolidation of the departments and the conditioned upon the sale of those vacated buildings. There was much discussion at the HR Finance meeting yesterday. The language has been amended between Corp Counsel and I, so I believe we have addressed those concerns about requiring another board to do something specific. But since we are using limited ARPA dollars to make this move, What we're asking is that the assets that we are vacating then be, any proceeds would be split between the debt reserve fund and the capital improvement fund.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Motion by Supervisor Marshall, second by Supervisor Cavelli. Any discussion? Supervisor Shafinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak in favor of this motion. I think that it is just good, sound fiscal responsibility on the part of the county, on a part of the county board, to make sure that we take care of these properties and do not have any excess property in the county name. So I think this makes good fiscal sense, and I would urge everybody to support it. Thank you.
Supervisor Sandalski, please.
I'm the same. I support this amendment. When we voted on this, I voted against it first for this very reason, because I felt I wasn't confident the county was going to sell this property. So I'm really thankful this amendment came forward, and I will support it. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Boots?
Supervisor Boots, no.
Supervisor Boots, no. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Any other discussion? Supervisor Baker, please.
Yes, I would like to move Amendment 6 to the floor, but not completely as written. Supervisor Van Cray has asked me to modify it slightly as part of the motion, and I am happy to do that. I would ask if the clerk has that language, if she could read the changes. Or if Supervisor Van Cray wants to read them, that'd be fine as well.
Go ahead, Supervisor Van Cray, if you want to read the proposed changes or the changes that are being offered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had asked Supervisor Baker to consider changing the, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9th, whereas I believe, where it states that the Health and Human Services Committee voted unanimously to reduce the imbalance between the revenue and historical expenditures in order to reduce the 2024 debt levy by $1.5 million. The Health and Human Services Committee actually, the motion was to recommend to the HR Finance Committee to consider recommendations regarding the Social Improvement Fund. So just looking for that update to accurately reflect the actions of the committee. Thank you.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hardinger. Discussion. Supervisor Robinson.
On the amendment?
This is on the amendment. Yeah.
Right.
I'll have Corp Counsel clarify.
Right, so right on the table right now is Supervisor Baker's amendment with the changes as read by Supervisor Van Cray. So there's not a second amendment on the floor
Right.
at this time. It's just
It's
one
the-
amendment that
You-
could be amended at one additional time. So we're not more confused than we already are.
So just to be clear, before the amendment was offered by Supervisor Baker, he agreed to change the language on that whereas, and that's what's on the floor with that verbiage change. Supervisor Sandalski.
I just want to say I support this amendment. I'm looking back at all the tax levies over the past since 2015. I just kind of went through We had increases from 0.97. The highest was in 2022, a 2.9% increase. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but if we get this amendment passed, it'll get it down to 3.1. But right now, we're at around 5.7%, if my numbers are correct. I wouldn't support the 5.7, but the 3.1 I would consider. That's more responsible to the taxpayers. 5.7, I feel, is not fiscally responsible to the hardworking taxpayers of Marathon County. Thank you.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So this amendment basically has two parts to it. The first part is the Social Improvement Fund went up in the last 3 years by approximately $9 million, roughly $3 million a year, but not totally $3 million a year, or not exactly $3 million a year. And the first part of this would use some of that $14 million that's in there in the Social Improvement Fund to add to the revenue of the Social Services Department. So the difference between expenditures in any department and revenues in any department is the tax levy, which can either be sales tax or property tax. So because the expenditures in social service have been budgeted greater than actual, we've been building that Social Service Improvement Fund up. And what this first step would do is use some of that fund to increase the revenues, or to increase that revenue side, and then decrease the demand for taxes. The second step, and that's $1.5 million. The second step of that is, because now there's $1.5 million less need for taxes in the budget, we would take $1.5 million of the sales tax support in the budget out and add that to the debt service. So there's a sales tax piece where we reduce the sales tax that's going to support the budget and use that for debt service. So if you look at the fiscal impact is that the tax levy would go down by $1.5 million. The operating levy would stay the same, so we're not impacting our levy limits. The debt levy would go down by $1.5 million, and the overall tax levy would go down by $1.5 million. The second part of the second, therefore, says that going forward, just in 2025, the SIF fund balance, the Social Improvement Fund balance, would not be included in the 2025 KIP fund rollover calculations. And that has not been included in those calculations since 2019. It was included prior to that, but in the last 3 years, that has not been included. And basically, that doesn't prohibit future boards from using that money for the KIP if they would decide to. It just doesn't automatically get rolled over. So it basically gives future boards the flexibility to either use social service fund, to use it for social service funds if we would have placements that are greater than are budgeted for, or greater than expected, not budgeted for. Or we can do the same thing. We can use it to add to the revenues and help with debt service. But it gives future boards more flexibility to do that. So that's basically the short description of that. Essentially, we're lowering taxes now to pay for the debt that, or I should say, we're not reducing taxes as much as is in the current budget. In order to do that, we're balancing the Social Improvement Fund revenues and expenditures. Thank you.
Supervisor Shafinsky, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. And I'm going to speak in favor of this amendment. And one of the reasons why is that I believe that it is fiscally responsible, and that given the current impact of inflation on the taxpayers of Marathon County. Reducing the budget down to a 3 or 3-point-something% increase as opposed to 5 to 6% is fiscally responsible and responsive to our constituents who are struggling. I mean, we have a lot of people who 2 or 3, 4 years ago were doing quite well with inflation, with the price of gas, with the price of natural gas, with the price of home heating oil, doing what they've done, basically going up by 50% or more, are now living paycheck to paycheck. So I think it behooves us to reduce the levy limit as much as possible. I think it does it in a very responsible way because we also take some of that money. The county should not be running a ever-increasing I don't want to say slush fund, but it makes sense to be responsibly budgeting for what we think is going to happen. But when we're seeing a $3 million repeating increase budget surplus that is sitting aside, we don't have the right to be sitting on that money. We're not doing the taxpayers a service. And this helps to reduce that over expenditure, that over taxation, and it does so by taking those funds and allocating them in a very fiscally responsible manner. So I would encourage all of my fellow supervisors to vote yes.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to encourage you to vote no on this. We routinely talk about trying to run the county as a business. And as such, we adopted a number of policies historically. Include one of those policies is that we will take our fund balance and roll it into our capital improvement program for funding. It actually comes back 2 years later because what we do is we close out the books each year. We audit the books, which happens if 2023. That audit happens in the first 2 quarters of next year. That establishes what that fund balance is, and that fund balance is supposed to then be rolled into the capital improvement program for the following year. Unfortunately, we didn't do that with the social improvement fund, and that grew. But we have some critical needs. I passed out something on KIP funding. This is approximate. Don't hold me to. Chris found an error relative to 2011 and unfunded should be reduced by 300,000. Therefore, net projects would go up 300,000. But it's an example of where our KIP balance is. And if you look at it in 2022 and 2023, we had significant increases in the KIP fund balance, or that fund balance at the end of the year. That was due to a lot of the American Rescue Act dollars and the other dollars that were coming in to deal with COVID that allowed us to replace some of the county levy for some of those programs, thereby increasing the fund balance. In addition, we had hiring freezes, and we were trying to react to COVID, the unknowns of COVID from a fiscal perspective. Travel reduced, staff, higher fund balance. But we've also, if you look carefully too, we had a period where we were doing borrowing on a regular basis to the tune of about $39,000 during this 2018 through 23 period of time. That doesn't include the North Central borrowing. We also have applied highway fund balance in the tune of $13,000, almost $14,000. And this reflects the amendments that we've adopted tonight. We're committing through the KIP process, through the KIP plan that we adopt annually, $12.7 million. We've had some other capital projects, the audiovisual improvements in the courthouse that aren't reflected in those numbers. But I raise those from the perspective of that we've had some extenuating circumstances that have increased the fund balance through the COVID response. We've used bonding in the past. We've used highway reserves, but we need to protect that KIP fund balance and make sure that it's there to deal with ongoing projects. We just recently increased the level of funding for rolling stock for the highway department, the sheriff's department, and CPZ. First increase in too long, as Jim would point out, and we just have needs that we need to make continuous investments that a business would do. By taking away that social improvement fund and denying access to that in the KIP fund, we're increasing the likelihood that we're going to borrow at significantly higher rates than what we've borrowed for in the past because of market conditions. So I would urge you to think through this carefully. That fund balance isn't going away. It is being set aside for a specific purpose that a board in the past had the foresight to establish a policy to allow that fund balance to go and pay for our capital improvement projects, which is what we're trying to do with this budget.
I want to make a couple of comments. First off, it's been said that the tax levy is going up 5.7%. That is correct. However, we have to understand what makes up that increase. 2.3% of that 5.7, or 2.3%. So 2.3% of that is net new construction. If we think about it as something, it's net new taxpayers paying on, I put up a shed, for example, and I should expect to pay more taxes because I have a new shed. That's the new property that's being taxed now. So 2.3% of the 5.7% is new construction. So the amount that we're asking the taxpayers to pay is the difference between the two, and not the full 5.7, because the new taxpayers, if we call it something, is the net new construction. And to reinforce one of the points that Supervisor Robinson made, I did a calculation yesterday on the effective rate on our total borrowing. And our effective rate is 2.5, and I don't remember the actual carry-out percent. That is the effective rate on the average total debt that we have in the worst-case scenario. So the $99 million is carrying a debt rate, interest rate of 2.5 plus percent. 2.5, I think it was 2.51. Then I went to the finance department and asked them what we are receiving as an interest rate on the investment funds that we have. Because a business would do that. A business would look at what are we paying in interest versus what are we receiving in interest. And the interest that we're receiving on our investments is 5.some%. We're paying, again, 2.5%, 2.5 plus percent, and we're receiving 5.1 plus percent. So next is Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is going to be difficult for me because I've never voted against lowering taxes. However, this is a timing issue. And the reason I'm saying it's a timing issue is everybody in this room, including myself, supports this resolution to lower taxes. However, with what we're doing with this reserve, I had intended on asking the board to use that for two purposes: the Forensic Science Center and to relocation of the Highway Department. And the reason we need this for the Forensic Science Center is we want to go out for bids by the end of this year. We do not have the $2 million from the federal government yet, which, whether that's going to come or not, that's a crapshoot. But we do have $2 million committed from them. We did receive $1 million from the B. Esther Greeneck Foundation, and we did receive the $7 million from the state. I just cannot see losing that $8 million, the $7 from the state and the $1 from the Greeneck Foundation. I hope we don't have to go into this fund, but we need that money to go out for bids. And so what I'm asking is, hopefully we don't have to do that. We are going to continue to the Forensic Science Center Task Force. And administration is going to continue to reach out to different foundations to see if we can increase those funds that we need. We're approximately $5 million short. But like I said, I totally agree with Supervisor Baker's idea on trying to lower the tax rate. However, with not being able to use this money, I'm afraid that we are going to lose that $8 million because the only way we are able to use that is to build the Forensic Science Center. The Highway Department, we've been talking about moving or relocating the Highway Department for, I know, at least 10 years. We could use some of that money to help with the relocation. And like I said, it's difficult for me to ask you to do this. However, like I said, I hope we don't have to dip into that money, but if we don't have that money committed like we did with the ARPA funds. The ARPA funds were committed, the $2 million. We haven't used all of it, but if we don't use it, we spent approximately $500,000 on design, and we're not going to have a Forensic Science Center. This Forensic Science Center will be there forever. This is going to benefit the tax-paying people in Marathon County for 50 years, if not longer. And so, like I said, it's difficult for me to come and ask you to do this. However, like I said, to be responsible for our tax dollars, this is something that I believe instead of, we're not going to borrow for this Forensic Science Center. This is going to be paid for by cash. So like I said, it's difficult for me to ask you to do this, but like I said, it's temporary. We could use this money next year. We are going to reimburse if we do use any of the money from this social improvement program. And if we get the $2 million from the federal government and we get money from other foundations, we will reimburse this this social improvement program. So it's, like I said, it's asking you to delay this. And like I said, I would urge you to not support this, even though it's hard for me to say that. So thank you.
Just to give the board a little bit of an update, the congressionally directed spending $2 million that was effectively secured through Senator Baldwin's office. Where we're at with that is under the way the federal government is funding itself is under continuing resolutions and is not being funded by a budget. And in order for congressionally directed spending projects to actually get funded is the federal government has to pass a budget or have a omnibus bill passed. Continuing resolutions by themselves do not do that. So at some point, if the federal government does get around to it, and in talking to WCA, they figured that the next, the current talk is another continuing resolution to avoid a shutdown in November 17th. And it will have another continuing resolution to possibly December, maybe January. Then we may be looking at hopefully either an omnibus bill or a budget, and then we might know. Then we would see. But it may also get another continuing resolution, and so we are waiting. But the senator fully supports the project and has it in the legislation. But again, it has to be legislation that has to be passed. Supervisor Van Crey is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a couple of comments. One is that the Social Services Department is not just sitting on money for fun. That reserve fund is used for when we have to pay for the highest out-of-home placement for youth, which can be incredibly expensive. So while there's a lot of money in there, if we had many youth that needed to be in that highest level of out-of-home placement, it would go very quickly. And then my other comment I'd like to make is that this is seemingly a one-time fix, using your savings to pay your mortgage type of thing. And I think it needs to be very clear to the taxpayer that if this does pass, we're right back in the same position next year. So we have to figure out another one-time fixed plan to reduce that tax levy if we want to continue to keep it low for the taxpayer. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just point out that on page 43, the state shared revenue, that we did get another $1,580,000 from the state. If that additional revenue did not come through, our increase that we're asking the taxpayer for is 8.5%. The Social Improvement Fund has grown over the last 4 years. It has been highlighted on page 9 of every audited financial statement, and no action was taken to put it into the Capital Improvement Fund. So it would appear that that is not a standard policy, or we're not following policy, one of the two. But for 4 years, we did not sweep it. It's a reasonable action to use prior surpluses to decrease the tax amount for citizens, and a no vote on this amendment is a vote to tax our citizens more than necessary. Also, we have spent zero of our contingency this year, $800,000. We also have confirmed yesterday through the HR Finance meeting, Director Palmer forecasted that the Social Improvement Fund will grow by another $800,000 this year because our out-of-home placements are lower than expected. So we will be taking the county portion of that money is going from 6.3 million to forecasted to be 7.1 million. All Supervisor Baker is asking for is 1.5 million out of 7.1. So it seems like a reasonable request. Thank you.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I've heard a few different things that I don't believe accurately reflect the situation. One is that we have low interest rates on our existing debt, and we have high interest rates in our savings, and I believe that is completely accurate. However, this does not pay our debt back any more quickly, so those statements are more or less irrelevant because we're just paying the debt back at the same rate that we were, and we are just not asking the taxpayer to do it. Second, if things continue to go in the next 2 years as they have went in the last 3 years, the resolution does not use any of the funds from the Social Improvement Fund. It's the only proposal on the table that is true for. What the proposal does is say, instead of increasing the Social Improvement Fund by $3 million, let's increase it by $1.5 million and use the $1.5 million savings to pay for the taxes. Now, as Supervisor Marshall suggested, the conservative estimate from both the finance director and the social services director is that it's going to go up by $800,000. That's the county's share. But history shows it's went up by $3 million over the last 3 years. So if we don't change anything, the expectation would be that it is going to grow. So really the resolution on the table is the only discussion that would actually preserve the Social Improvement Fund. And then to Vice Chair McEwen's comments, which I not necessarily supporting using the Social Improvement Fund for that, but if the resolution is voted down, that money won't be available for the Regional Forensic Science Center, because what will happen is the statement is that the policy is that that money will go back into the KIP fund. That won't be available for 2 years. So that will take that money away from the Regional Forensic Science Center. In the resolution, that provides the board the ability to use that money next year. So you're actually, by voting against the resolution, you're taking that money away from the Regional Forensic Science Center. Again, I'm not advocating for using the Social Improvement Fund for that, but if you are in support of the Regional Forensic Science Center, then you need to vote yes on this resolution, because the resolution gives the board the next board or this board the opportunity to use that money. If it's voted down, as Supervisor Robinson said, then we go back and we presume that the policy from 4 years ago, which, if I am correct, was never actually voted on by there's no evidence that's been provided to me that that policy was ever voted on by the board back in 2004. And that policy was in effect from 2005 to 2018, and it wasn't followed for those years. So, you know, a lot of this is just basically using policy to justify what the ends of, you know, to get the goals and ends. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm trying to give the money back to the taxpayers, but I'm not trying to use the social improvement fund to do it. I'm trying to just say, let us change the way that we're budgeting. I would call it rational or balanced budgeting, so that we're not putting that money into the social improvement fund. We're just taking the money that we were putting in there and using that to pay the debt. And also there was a question about, this is a one-time thing. I presented a plan to HR Finance that basically requires $2.5 million of this balanced budget to pay the extra taxes, and $3.9 million from sale of property per Supervisor Marshall's resolution. Between that, we would only need to raise the debt levy by $100,000 a year for the next 8 years, each year, and that would have minimal impact on the county taxpayers, and that would cover, as long as the North Central Healthcare can meet their agreed upon share of the debt, that would cover those debt payments. So thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. So I'm going to vote yes to Supervisor Baker's amendment. I think he puts in a tremendous amount of work and delivers information that is accurate and can be supported. I will say, if the justification is we could use the money for something else, I don't see an amendment in front of us in the packet saying we could use the money for Forensic Center or Highway Department. So I'm voting on this amendment, which is relative to what we're doing right now. If we want to talk about that, I would certainly support the funding of the Forensic Center, which is in that $3 to $5 million range. I think it's important. I think we can figure out a way. I think there's a lot of smart people in the room and in our departments to do that. I will say the Highway Department the relocation of that is a completely different question, because we're talking about something in the $50 million range, which is going to be borrowed. It's going to be a debt. We're not going to be scraping up funds out of our balances and our reserves to pay for that. So I wouldn't think that that's relative whatsoever. And the last thing I would say is, and I was speaking to the administrator about a different issue, but a different department. But the over-budgeting continues. The Social Improvement Fund is another example of that. And at what point do we use these funds, I think is an important conversation. I understand that we roll over a lot of money into our KIP or into some reserve. I think what Supervisor Baker has provided makes sense for a use of that money. So thank you.
Supervisor Wilhelm.
I am going to support this resolution because when I look at government and we say we try to run a county like a business, technically we don't, because you can always raise taxes if things go poorly. In a business, usually they go bankrupt. But I'm not saying it's happening, I'm just giving an analogy. But so I'm going to support this.
Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add to that prior statement, though. Businesses don't have levy limits, so we are in a different situation compared to businesses. I got a couple things here. I'd like to take a moment just to thank HR Finance and members of staff for working on this. I don't think that we've driven home enough that the proposed budget has a 20-cent reduction in the tax levy. That's great. That is fantastic progress. I think we owe them all a thank you at some point this evening. I will not be supporting this amendment. After hearing Supervisor McEwen's concerns, I'm not going to do anything that will jeopardize that forensic science center. And given those comments, it would not lead me to a yes vote. Another thing I'd add is that, the comment was made is that if you vote no, that would be unreasonable to the taxpayers. I think if you vote yes, it would be unreasonable to the taxpayers. If you vote yes, you jeopardize those long-term CIP projects where you might have higher interest rates in the long run. You're probably going to end up having to pay more in the long run anyway. So I don't see that as a valid argument. And the last thing I would say is that $1.5 million reduction, if you look at the numbers on paper, represents a measly 2% of the proposed $57,954,347 proposed levy. I think we have a lot more to lose with jeopardizing those future CIP projects. So I would encourage my fellow board members to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still going to vote yes on this amendment, and I would encourage everyone else to thoughtfully consider doing so as well. One of the things that we found is basically assuming that everybody's numbers are correct. At the end of this amendment, if approved, it would leave approximately $5.5 million in that fund. It would also make that $5.5 million available for possible use. Now, I understand, and I completely understand and agree with Vice Chair McEwen's comment on the Forensic Science Center. A lot of hard work has been put into that. We want to find a way to get that project across the finish line, make it happen, and he's very concerned, and I think that's very laudable. But there's another option here, and that is to look at that $5.5 million as another possible vehicle to help bridge the gap temporarily until the federal money would become available. So I don't think that by voting yes to this amendment, we're not somehow shutting down a vehicle by which we could help fund the Forensic Science Center and bridge the gap that they are currently have because they're waiting on the federal government to get its act together. So I think we can do both things. I think the other thing that comes to mind is we talk a lot about savings and savings plans, and we think a little bit about family finances. We try and put money in a savings account as well as our checking accounts or what have you as we run our family finances. At the end of the day, you don't put money in the savings account to just sit there. You put it in there, and then you do that with forethought, with the idea that at some point in the future, you're going to use it on some useful project, whatever that might be. In this case, one of the useful projects that we can do is we can return some of that money back to the taxpayer in form of lower levy, and I think that's admirable, especially considering the stress that the taxpayers are under this year. They're going to be under the same stress next year. Inflation is not going down. The price of gas is not going back to $2 a gallon. So I think we have a lot of stressed out taxpayers, and I think we owe it to them to do what we can. The other thing is, it's never a bad thing to pay down debt. It may be a small amount, but the first step is working strenuously and diligently to always try and pay down as much of your debt as possible. And this amendment does both of those, and it still preserves options to support the Forensic Science Center. So that's why I would encourage everyone to vote yes. Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Supervisor Baker and Supervisor Shafinsky. I should have mentioned, and I forgot that if this resolution does not pass, or if it does, I would bring a resolution to this board next month, allowing the Forensic Science Center to, if needed, utilize $3 million, $5 million, whatever is needed, with the assumption that we would continue to do the fundraising, and that amount of money would be reimbursed or as much as we could. So I do intend on doing that. So thank you.
Supervisor Sandalski.
I just had one last comment. When you look at North Central Health Care, it's basically it's the largest social improvement fund government entity in Marathon County. So I couldn't see a better use of this social improvement excess fund than to pay for the debt of North Central, which is the largest social improvement department here in Marathon County. Thank you.
Well, let's first understand that there's three parts to that $14 million that's in the social improvement fund. There's federal dollars, there's state dollars, and then there's county tax levy in that fund. And unfortunately, that there is restrictions on the federal dollars and there's restrictions on the state dollars, and they're not allowed to be used to cover debt for NCHC. So let's make that first clear. Second, there was a point, at one point, a supervisor said that if you vote in favor of this amendment, that allows the remaining dollars to be utilized. The board always has the discretion to amend, if this were voted down, also to use the CIP or to transfer out of the social improvement fund the portion that is considered tax levy. Supervisor Robinson's next.
I want to address a couple of issues. First of all, I want to thank Supervisor Baker for bringing the issue of the social improvement fund balance to us. We were looking at the audit report, and it was a restricted account in the audit report. And I think what we found is that we need to take a better look at those. And toward that end, Supervisor Baker and I have talked briefly, and I've talked with administration, but it's our intent to look at all fund balances, all of our accounts, to see what is the balance, what's the source of the fund, what the historic trends have been, what the uses of those fund balances are, what restrictions are on them, similar to the social improvement fund, who has authority over those, and what policies do we have in place, who determines what's surplus, which I think is at the root of this problem. Was it missed by staff, and should some of it have been rolled, and who controls the funds, and present that to you. So for every one of our accounts, whether it's a solid waste department as an enterprise, and just so we have a better understanding of what our policies are going forward. But we're not buying down any debt with this. We're paying for debt. We're not reducing our debt because we're obligated to pay that through our budgeting process. We're not taking this money and redeeming bonds early, because first of all, there are call provisions and penalties if you do that. So we're not buying down the debt. We're paying our debt as it is incurred. But again, I want to just reference this sheet. We have borrowed in the past, and we will need to borrow in the future if we don't have adequate reserves in our capital improvement plan. Those interest rates will be significantly higher going forward than they have been in the past. We had one issue at, 1.9%? Christy, was it approximately one of our issues, interest rate? You know, that's great money. We won't have those opportunities going forward. My first mortgage was 13.58% back in 1977. I'd love to have even the current rates, but you know, we're always capturing to that. But we've had ARPA dollars we're using. We're drawing down fund balances. We can't continually do that. So we have to be pragmatic, and we have to look to the future, and we have to keep our options open relative to funding that. If we look at the average of $33,000 worth of projects, now not included in here is grants and other funding sources, but those weren't material necessarily to the discussion today. But we need to make sure that we have an adequate fund to pay for those projects going forward, or our taxes will go up in order to pay for the increased costs associated with it. When you use the capital improvement fund, the interest rate is zero because you're not borrowing money. So let's be careful to try to protect our future, protect the integrity of our current investments that may need work going forward.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only thing I was going to say is respectfully, I don't think a yes or no vote should focus around the forensic center, and here's why. Next month, regardless, yes or no, that can be brought forward. And it can be some sort of resolution that says we're going to use funds that are applicable out of whatever those funds are. And we're going to allocate funds into that. And then we're going to replace those with donations. So that can be done regardless. So I would say for that particular item, I would hope that people wouldn't focus on that as a yes or a no. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Called the question.
Is there objection to question being called? Is there any objection to question being called? There's no objection. Is there a second? Is there a second to question being called? Supervisor Rosenberg with a second for question being called. We had 3 people in the queue. Supervisor Langenhan and Supervisor Boots are still in the queue. And so they will be allowed to speak if the motion. Supervisor Baker was also in the queue. Which order it was? No. Okay, there's a motion made and seconded. It is not debatable. It does require a 2/3 majority vote to end debate. Again, there is 3 people on the queue to speak. So is everybody clear? It is a vote to end debate on the motion that's on the floor, which is the amendment. Everybody clear? Again, it does require a 2/3 majority vote. We will proceed.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. And we'll proceed. And it is a 2/3 majority. Debate will be ended at the time when the 3 people that were on the queue, Supervisor Langenhan, Supervisor Baker, and Supervisor Boots. Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very quick. To simplify this, you're asking for pennies today from the taxpayer for essentially dollars in the future with those long-term CIP projects. I think this is fiscally irresponsible to vote yes with this. I would encourage you all to vote no. Thank you.
Supervisor Baker.
Thank you. So essentially the question is, do we want to raise taxes today, or do we not? We want to reduce the amount that we're raising taxes today. In conversation with both staff leadership and board leadership, essentially the concern is that if we don't raise taxes today, then when we raise taxes in the future, it's going to be too large of an increase, and that's going to be a political problem. I am not in favor of raising taxes today so that we have a more amenable path to raising taxes in the future. I want to not raise taxes today and manage our reserves in our county government in such a way that we don't also need to raise taxes in the future. Thank you.
Supervisor Boots is next.
It's fine. We can just move on.
Okay, debate is ended, and now we will proceed to vote on the motion on the floor. The motion on the floor is the Supervisor Baker amendment using $1.5 million of the Social Improvement Fund to effectively, in the long and short of it, reduce $1.5 million of debt service on the tax levy and move the balance of the allocatable tax levy from the Social Improvement Fund to restrict that into another fund, not to be the rollover in the CIP fund. Is everybody clear what that a yes vote would approve that amendment, a no vote would not approve that amendment? Is everybody clear?
Point of order.
Point of order?
That description was not accurate. I would ask that Corp Counsel describe it. We're not moving to a different fund that's restricted. That's just not accurate.
So I think the best way for me to describe this is to read the now therefore be it resolved paragraph. So that's what I'll do. So the first, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors for the County of Marathon does hereby amend the proposed budget as follows. Number one, increase the revenues in the 2024 budget for the transfer from fund balance social improvement fund by adding the sum of $1.5 million to Fund 200 Social Improvement Fund revenues. This will decrease the Fund 200 Social Improvement Fund net tax levy totals from $6,935,723 to $5,435,723. Number two, increase the Finance Department Fund 300 Debt Fund revenues county sales tax from $3 million to $4.5 million. This will decrease the debt levy by $1.5 million from $2,553,100 to $1,053,100. Number three, decrease the County Treasurer Fund 101 General Fund Revenues County Sales Tax from $13 million to $11.5 million. This will increase the Fund 100 General Fund net tax levy totals from $35,845,527 to $37,345,527. Now, therefore, be it further resolved that the Social Improvement Fund balance will not be included in the 2025 Capital Improvement Project Fund rollover calculations to provide future county boards with resources and flexibility in providing for future expenditure needs of the Social Service Department and future potential debt service of the debt associated with the North Central Healthcare Mount View Care Center without burdening Marathon County taxpayers with unnecessary additional taxes through increases in the debt levy portion of the overall tax levy. So an aye vote would approve this amendment to the budget, a no vote would not approve this amendment to the budget.
Okay, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Boots? Supervisor Boots, I still didn't hear you. Are you on mute?
No.
Vote is no.
Supervisor Boots, no.
Boots, no. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is defeated. Moving on. Any other amendments? Any other discussion? Supervisor Robinson?
Before we vote, I just wanted to piggyback on Supervisor Lanahan's comments and thank everyone. And this has been a different process this year where we've tried to engage the board earlier and often in the development of the budget. And we thank you for your participation in both the assumptions and priorities and the engagement at the committee level in the fees. And I want to thank the administrator, deputy administrator, finance director, and all the other staff that have been involved in developing the budget. And these are never easy, and I think at the end of the day, we've got something that we can all be proud of in context of a budget.
Any other discussion? Excuse me. Any other discussion? Okay. Now on the final product of the budget, as amended with all the amendments. Everybody clear on what we're voting on now? Christie, please. Finance Director Cordes. Excuse me, Palmer. Been on the board too long.
All right, the only thing on the budget or the budget resolution that you have before you is that you did make adjustments to the CIP plan. So you have actually increased your total expenditures by $899,947. So on the second page of your resolution, it's going to say, and be it therefore resolved that the Marathon County Board of Supervisors does adopt the 2024 Marathon County budget of $202,845,319. And so the levy and all the other items are correct. That would be the only thing based on the amendments you approved that would change on the resolution.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried, but is not unanimous. Thank you. We have a budget for 2024. I want to express my sincere thank you to the Finance Department, all of the department heads, and administration. With that, we are down to announcements and/or requests. Prior to that, I'll take privilege to say this coming Saturday is the recognition of Veterans Day. So I would like to have anyone in the county board and any individuals that is in the audience, please stand and be recognized for your service, and thank you for your service to this country as a veteran. Thank you. We need signatures from County Board, from Health and Human Services, Transportation Coordinating Committee, Human Resources, Finance and Property, Executive, Public Safety, Supervisor Unger, Supervisor Seefeld on some ERC resolutions also. And a note from the clerk, your campaign packets are in your mailbox. Again, let Kim know if you are going to be filing non-candidacy paperwork. You can start circulating nomination papers December 1st of 2023 to be placed on the ballot for the 2024 election. With that, any other announcements and/or requests? Seeing none, I'll take the next most famous motion. Supervisor Drabeck with a motion and Supervisor Longenhau with a second to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.